Hello, good evening. Welcome to the second meeting of my work group at SALT titled Archive and Regeneration. Tonight we have a guest speaker, Carmelle Safdie. And Carmelle is a friend of mine from Bard College, Milton Avery Graduate School of the Arts. A while ago, I received a newsletter from Carmelle. This newsletter was describing her recent artistic work, announcing her newly updated website, and also she was talking about her work with the Irwin Rubin Archive, who is her professor, who used to be her professor at Cooper Union, teaching color theory. In the newsletter, she said she has found tremendous fulfillment in her work on the Irwin Rubin Archive. I was very excited to receive this newsletter from Carmelle because my artistic research recently has been on archives as well. I had experience on working on a personal archive to create a memory site as well. And the general theme I was interested in is archive and regeneration. When I checked out Carmelle's newly updated website, I ran into her work titled Rubbings. These are a set of work in which she created rubbings on the gravestones in a cemetery in New York. And I thought this artistic work of hers is very parallel to her work with the archive, the Irwin Rubin Archive, because it was challenging the cold death as a cold end with the bright colors they had. And also the act of rubbing is so sensual. And I have experienced personally that working with an archive has such a character as well. I see building an archive as a form of care and creating narrations from an archive as a form of regeneration, creating a continuity between the dead and the living. And then I wrote Carmelle an email and we started a conversation. Later on, she also mentioned me about the work of her grandmother, Vera Ronnen, and that she passed away in 2015, and that Carmelle inherited her Enamel Archive, Color Archive. And so I'm in Basel right now for an exhibition and research, to continue my research on the archives, actually. And Vera Ronnen has some work in Basel as well, in the Novartis building and some other buildings. On one day, thanks to Marco Serra, I was able to visit Vera Ronnen's work and experience them first person. So today, Carmelle is going to describe her process, her work with the archives, and her theories about the archives. So let me introduce Carmelle briefly. Carmelle Safdie has participated in 3 biennial exhibitions at the Queen's Museum, where she exhibited a commissioned installation in 2012. Major works have also been shown at Siccome Jenkins & Co. in New York City, Franklin Street, works in Stanford City and Palazzo Cavour in Turin, Italy. She holds a BFA from Cooper Union and an MFA in painting from Bard College, where she met Başöz in the summer of 2009. Carmelle, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I leave the stage to you.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me, Sena, and also thank you all for accommodating me by hosting this talk in English. And I'm really excited. I was really excited to learn about our parallel interests after having been out of touch for so many years. And I'm going to start by discussing the rubbing project that Sena introduced. Yes, as Sena described, for several years, I worked making rubbings in a neglected cemetery in Queens, New York, which is part of New York City. It's a Jewish cemetery, and I'm hoping that the images are on screen now. I'm going to start going through the images as I speak. in the cemetery, I was working with pastels and newsprint paper to make impressions of individual gravestones. Rather than responding to the sort of information on the gravestone, I was actually interested more in the overall graphics of the stones, and also in representing the performative act of rubbing, and I was interested in foregrounding my encounter in the cemetery, and also was really interested in using color as a way to transport the actual gravity of these stones into using color to unlock the stones into more metaphysical graphic images. And I made each rubbing, I had standard sizes of paper that I cut in advance that I was working with. So I made the rubbings on site onto a very thin newsprint paper. And then afterwards, I would have the paper mounted onto panels. So here you just see from the side how the paper is mounted onto a panel with a beveled edge that can hang directly on the wall. And I was working with a variety of different color and mark making tools to capture each stone. I kind of addressed with colors that I felt really unlocked the information. And I like this one, Stella Link, because you see at the bottom, you can see impressions of the grass that was growing up against the stone, which I feel really helps capture the place of the cemetery. And this one, which appears that it might be upside down, is actually right side up. It's a stone that had toppled over because the cemetery I was working in was in such disrepair. There were many toppled over stones. And if you can see, this one also has grass, an impression of grass at the bottom, which I feel is sort of like a access, like a way to decode what's happening at the cemetery, that it's not just an inverted image, but it's actually a toppled over tombstone. So I'm just going to show a few more examples just so you get a sense of the variety. And then in addition to making impressions just of tombstones, I also made a series of more decorative rubbings. These were using a single leaf that was on one tombstone, rubbed repeatedly in different colors to make these decorative patterns. So I've done this in different color configurations and in different compositions as well. And then a parallel project to these rubbing panels were rubbing scrolls that I created for an exhibition at Sycamore Jenkins in New York. So for this body of work, I have taken the procedural tests that were part of my process in the cemetery and done them on very large pieces of paper that were customized to fit the length of the gallery wall. So I knew where they were going to be installed before I made them. And here's a detail that was also used as the image for this talk. So when I'm in the cemetery, I bring a lot of different materials with me, and I'm testing many different colors to figure out, before I make each rubbing, which kind of pastel, which color really works with each specific stone, because each specific stone has a very different texture and a different way that it's been carved. So rather than just doing these little tests on scraps of paper that I threw away, I ended up making these tests on very large pieces of paper, which I then mounted onto a sturdier, heavier paper in the form of these long scrolls and exhibited in the gallery. Okay, now I'm going to move ahead and talk about my work on the Irwin Rubin Archive. So also as Sena outlined, Irwin Rubin was my color theory professor at Cooper Union. And I was very lucky to have his class. I was in the last class that he taught before he retired, and he had taught for almost 50 years, and at Cooper Union he had taught for over 30 years. I really loved his class, and after he passed away, I was speaking with a former classmate, recalling how he had this amazing collection of his students' work, which he would use to teach his color theory class. His course was very much indebted to Josef Albers' interaction of color and Josef Albers' color pedagogy. Irwin Rubin had studied with Josef Albers at Yale in one of the first classes that Albers had at Yale. And it really felt special to be in his class because so much of the education we were getting at Cooper Union was really indebted to the Bauhaus tradition. And Irwin just brought that all to life and felt like a living link with this history, you know, through giving us firsthand stories and encounters that he had with Albers and also just with, you know, New York art world in the 60s and his experience teaching in the South in the 50s. And I just really loved his class. And so my former classmate and I were remembering how he had this amazing collection of his students' work. He would use past examples of students' work every time he introduced a new color assignment, and he would show us, you know, successful ways that the assignments completed, unsuccessful ways, and this was really a great way to, you know, get our imaginations going with what was possible for each assignment. And also it's very much in the tradition of Bauhaus pedagogy, using students' work as a teaching tool. So we were interested in the idea of archiving this collection of student work. And so I got in touch with Irwin's widow, Christina Rubin, who also is a graduate of Cooper Union. And she was very excited about the project, but it turned out that this material, well, she didn't know where this material was, and she suggested that I contact some professors at Cooper Union. So I did that, but it turns out that this material was either destroyed or lost at the time of his retirement. Some professors said he threw it away, but I don't know if I believe that. Also, the building that he had taught in had been recently demolished. So it's possible, I don't know, that it ended up in a dumpster or something. But anyways, the mystery of what happened to that collection of work is still an open case. And this was, you know, Irwin passed away in 2006. So this is probably 2007 that I got in touch with his widow. And so while that project was not realized, I did keep in touch with Christina Rubin, and I would go over to her house, you know, once every year or two for dinner. And slowly she started showing me work that Irwin made in the 1960s. He worked with both collage and painted wood constructions. This is a very large construction that all the frontal planes are painted red. But then when we step to the side of the piece, we see colors popping out and revealed. Here's a detail that just shows the amount of precision and craft that went into each of these constructions. Here's another construction that is painted white on all the frontal planes and has colors only on the edges. And if I go back to that frontal image, you see that we do see reflections of the colors on the sides that are reflected onto the white surface. And then from the side, we can see the colors. And so, so slowly, Chris Rubin is showing me this work and you know, expressing interest in doing research about his work. Here's one that is a little more figurative, and it has these sort of psychedelic, like lollipop, cruciform flower figures. I'll show a detail. And so, yeah, so Chris Rubin expressed interest in finding out more about Irwin's career because basically he stopped making work very abruptly in the late 60s, shortly after they met. And so she hadn't really been around for most of the years that he was exhibiting. And she really didn't, you know, she knew that some of his work had been in important exhibitions or shown at reputable galleries, but she really didn't know that much. He didn't save many papers, and she is, you know, wondering how to preserve his work and ensure that his legacy as a teacher and an artist is remembered. And so she sort of enlisted me to do some research about his career, and then I proposed to do a website, and now this has developed into sort of like an archive project. So we are locating works. This one here is at the museum at the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island. Here's a side view. So we've been locating works, finding out there are some in museum collections, but they weren't necessarily like made available to the public or even documented. So working with museums to get documentation, and also Irwin did not keep a very detailed CV. So I'm doing, and because he didn't save that much of the ephemera associated with his career, I'm just ended up doing a lot of research just to, you know, figure out exactly which shows he was in, where they were reviewed, get copies of those reviews, and some outstanding goals for the project. So now we've launched a website where we have an online archive available, and some outstanding goals for the project are to mount an exhibition of his work, publish a catalog, do some more research, and also, you know, place his work and his archive in a collection or in multiple collections to ensure that they will be taken care of long term. Okay. Now I am going to jump forward and talk about my grandmother, Vera Ronnen's work and her career. Vera made enameled steel that was incorporated into architecture. For those of you who are not familiar with enamel, it is colored glass powder that is applied onto metal and then fired at very high temperature to create a glaze on that metal substrate. You know, you might see it very commonly in jewelry, or you see on an industrial level, you see it on cooking pots and bathtubs and sinks. So Vera was very interested in bringing the medieval jewelry techniques of enamel together with the industrial. So she used opaque and transparent jewelry powders over pre-enameled industrial steel plates. And she always worked with architects on new projects, and so her work was always incorporated into architecture. This image here shows a view of the Novartis campus in Basel, where Sena is doing her residency right now. And as you can see, there are murals on each floor. She also made elevator doors. Here's a close-up of one of the murals, and you can, as you see, there's also the door handles are made out of enamel, and it looks like on the top maybe there are holes cut out for the ventilation. So this is all, you know, custom paneling made to fit this new building that she has coated with her enamel compositions. And here are some of the elevator doors. And enamel is like an incredibly sturdy, durable, and archival material. You know, if it's applied correctly, it does not, you know, and it would not crack. It does not, the colors do not fade. It can be touched and cleaned, and Another benefit, it can be installed outdoors, which also, you know, when it's outdoors, you have sunlight that really brings out the nuance of the layers of the transparent and opaques that she's working with. And Sena got to visit the campus just the other day. And so I have a few photos that Sena took. Here is a detail of an elevator door with a big red circle on it. Here's, I guess this is the second floor with some elevator doors that have small circles. It was great to see this because this is not on her website and I have not seen these images. And here are some details. I think I can kind of see Sena reflected, her silhouette reflected there. And another one that has Vera's signature at the bottom. And I have some archival photos to show of Vera's process. This is how she applied the enamel powder onto the steel plates, and she would use straight edges and stencils to create shapes like those circles and those straight lines that you see. She would often, she would like sift with a stencil, creating a hard edge, and then she might take that stencil away and add more color lightly over that to soften the edge. Here's just some pictures that you can just kind of get the scale of her moving these panels around. Here's some color preparation. And here's a photo of her and her assistant moving some panels around. So she would prepare like sketches for each project in her studio where she had a small kiln and she'd make scale models. And then when it was time to fabricate these huge commissions, she would go to an industrial facility, like somewhere that, say, makes enamel bathtubs or sinks and has huge furnaces that could accommodate firing these very large pieces. Here's like a picture of some of the kilns she had in her own studio. And while the one on the left looks really big, but there's so much insulation involved that probably only you could fire, I don't know, maybe like a 18 by 24 inch, sorry, I don't know, in centimeters panel. Like the kiln on the right here is just for making very small sketches. So even though that was kind of a big piece of equipment, you can see you can only really, you know, fire about 6 by 6 inches. And on the wall here, you can see her, some of her test plates where she tests out the colors before she works with them. And then here's a photo of the industrial size kiln that would be used for one of her commissions. This photo was taken in 2009 in a factory on the Isle of Wight in England, where I worked with her on making a large mural piece that is now installed in Los Angeles. And my next image is a photo of the colors that were left behind in Vera's studio after she passed away in 2015. And towards the end of Vera's life, I was interested in perhaps making my own work with enamel. And so when she passed away, I took a small, I was not able to keep all of these colors. I took a small quantity of each color. I'm not planning to work on the scale that she did. So like, it's hard to, I actually have this jar here. This would be considered like a lot of color for someone working on, you know, in jewelry or on a small scale. This is 2 ounces, 56.7 grams. And she had, for each of her colors, she had many, many kilos of that color because of the scale that she was working on. So I took a small quantity of each of her colors and we donated the rest to an art school in Tel Aviv, which is where she lived at the end of her life. And I've always been interested in the color tests, the procedural tests that were part of the enameling process. Here is an example of one of the color tests from Vera's studio. And this was a very important process because with enamel, the color that you look at before it's fired is not what you get. Most of the colors just sort of look like a pastel powder. So you have to fire them in order to see what color they are. And then also the material that you put it onto will affect the color outcome. So are you working on gold, on silver, on copper, on steel that's coated with black, or steel that's coated with white? And then there are transparent colors and opaque colors. So you test to see what happens when you put different colors over each other. They don't always work out. Sometimes there's a chemical reaction. One color needs to be fired at a different temperature. So she had to do a lot of these tests before she could execute her large panels. You know, and also because she was working on multiple panels that fit together, there was just a lot of rigor that went into making sure that once they were fired, they would all the colors would look consistent over the multiple panels. So I was really interested in taking these test forms and using that as the basis for making an artwork. So what I've done so far is I have been cataloging all the colors that I got from her, and I have been studying enamel. I have taken a couple classes here in New York. I got my own kiln, and I am learning all kinds of techniques that I didn't know about that she didn't use. You know, working over silver foil and embossed copper. And right now I'm designing a modular piece that would, here's just a quick rendering. I'm sorry that I don't have photos, but it's in the very early stages. I'm designing a modular piece that will be sort of like a giant color chart of all of her colors, transparent over silver foil, opaques over black. And then I guess we'll see where that goes. Okay, so this is a picture of Irwin Rubin teaching color theory at Cooper Union. This is pretty much what he looked like when he was my professor. So when I caught up with Sena and we talked about my rubbings and the Irwin Rubin Archive and my grandmother's work and my work with her materials, Sena wondered if there is a connection between color and memory, and if Josef Albers' teachings and the interaction of color could be used as a metaphor for inherited archives. So I thought, actually, as an introduction to the Albers, which I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with, I would actually read part of the first section in the interaction of color, which is called Color Recollection of Visual Memory. If one says red, the name of a color, and there are 50 people listening, it can be expected that there will be 50 reds in their minds, and one can be sure that all these reds will be very different. Even when a certain color is specified, which all listeners have seen innumerable times, such as the red of the Coca-Cola sign, which is the same red all over the country, they will still think of many different reds. Even if all the listeners have hundreds of reds in front of them from which to choose the Coca-Cola red, they will again select quite different colors, and no one can be sure that he has found the precise red shade. And in the interaction of color, which has become sort of a manual for teaching color theory, Albers goes on to explain how color is contextual and color is relative based on its context. And the purpose of the course is to heighten one's awareness to how we perceive color so that we can understand how unstable it is. And Sena asked if I could show some examples of from the interaction of color. And I thought, since this is a talk on archives and personal archives, I thought instead of just, finding some stock images from the interaction of color, I would open up my own archive and pull out some of my color assignments that I did in Irwin Rubin's class. So this is one of the first assignments in the interaction of color, where we are aiming to make 3 colors look like 4 colors, also known as simultaneous contrast. So here we appear to have on the left, a green rectangle with a yellow shape layered over top. And on the right, a yellow rectangle with a light green shape layered over top. But there's a flap on the top of the collage here. And then when the flap is lifted, we see that the shape on the green and the shape on the yellow is the same color. But on the green, it appears more yellow. On the yellow, it appears more green. One of the next assignments was to make 4 colors look like 3. So here we have a pink square and a teal square, and what is meant to look like 2 sort of dull brown squares of the same color on each background. But again, we open up the flap, and then we can see that they are actually quite different, because on the top they're placed on the contrasting color. So this green rectangle that you see on the top of the pink is what appears to be the brown rectangle on the green. And the red rectangle, which you see on the top of the teal, is what appears to be the brown rectangle on top of the pink. And then one more example here was a collage that was dealing with transparency. So these are all of these assignments are made out of collaged paper, solid colored paper. And here, I don't remember the exact assignment, but the idea is that there appears to be a sort of peach-colored film that is overlapping the stripes of color and also the white board. But then on the back here, I see that we were assigned to isolate those colors. So the goal was to make an illusion of transparency out of solid color paper. And actually, I like ending on this image. I feel like this sort of resonates with a lot of my work. These procedural swatches, there's some notation in the corner, and even this, the industrial art supply logo here of the Pearl illustration board. These are all like formal themes that have come back in my work over the years. So I thought it might be appropriate to end on this image. And then, I don't know, Sena, do you want to like add anything before we take questions, or?
Well, yes, maybe I can ask a few questions myself.
Yeah.
Like in both cases, like it's like you volunteered to inherit the Irwin Rubin Archive, and your grandmother's archive you inherited through your, natural connection to her, basically. Like, I'm very much interested in this motivation of dealing with the archive and its relationship to care. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add about this, like how care or this personal connection influences your engagement with these archives?
Yes. In terms of the Irwin Rubin Archive, I haven't totally volunteered in the sense that I am being compensated financially. But I have, yes, I feel like I have sort of like volunteered to become part of his family in a way. I only knew him for 1 year, but now, and only, in a very like professional context of school. Now I've known his widow and his son for over 10 years. And I know so much about his life just through doing this research. And I think that, while I am being compensated to do the archiving as work, I do feel like I really believe in his work. I love his work. It brings me so much joy. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be working, preserving it. And I think that there is this whole world now of professionalized artist archives. And I find there's a lot of like conflicting language in that world. Like on the one hand, you know, this is culture and we should not let it get thrown in the dumpster, and we should preserve our culture. But on the other hand, like, don't think that your grandmother's work is important just because she's your grandmother, or just because she was in a show with so-and-so in the 1950s. So there's still this sort of like reinforced idea of an established historical importance. And for me, I just feel that I need to trust my instincts as an artist. And I really believe in Irwin Rubin's work and his teachings and the quality of both of those. And I don't, you know, he stopped making work after about 10 years of actively exhibiting. And in many ways that might make his archive not historically or commercially viable to many, but I don't know, I believe in the work. And same with my grandmother. I just like, I'm really invested in her work and preserving it. And it's so, so yes, it's definitely an act of care in that way. And I think in a way also like, so with I don't think I finished my thoughts about Albers as a metaphor for the archive. So I just think that like, if Albers is teaching us to, you know, be open to our perception of color and understanding that that is not fixed, and that we cannot have established systems for delineating how color is perceived. Even if we have an established color, let's say a standardized color like the Coca-Cola red, we have a certain Pantone color that Coca-Cola always uses to create the red. But it looks different depending on the context, depends on what colors it's next to, depends on what the lighting is, depends on how big the logo is in comparison to other colors around it. So in that way, I feel like it is a metaphor for archiving in a personal way, because when archiving in a personal way, we might need to throw out these established systems for what's considered important. And these sort of standardized ways of organizing information and historicizing information, and really just be more open to our own intuitive relationship.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this metaphor for the archive, actually, the Albers theory, which I became familiar with due to our conversation. One thing that it makes me think of is like the endless possibilities that an archive embodies, like how you contextualize it while narrating it, while using the material, can create endless different results. These possibilities is something that I think of. Something that's in my mind and I can't really find a solution for is there is lots of misunderstanding, or I think we should say misperception, in like when you were showing us examples of your work from when you were a student in Irwin Rubin's class. You know, when you open the flap, we are all of a sudden, oh, they were the same color actually, but they look different, or like they look so different, but you know, they looked different, but they were same. They looked same, but they were different. So all this misperception, how would it translate to working with an archive metaphorically, is a question I have in mind while I was listening to you. I don't know, do you have anything to say about this, or is it something to think about in the long run?
Yeah, I think it's something to think about. I think it's definitely my interest in working with my grandmother's materials is to sort of like explore and possibly exhaust the seemingly limitless possibilities with those colors and the combinations of those colors. And also a connection, I think, with like Irwin Rubin / Alpers's color class is that I think I was always like, I loved these assignments, but I was always kind of confused as to how I was supposed to apply this to something that was art with a capital A. And I think a lot of my work has returned to visiting these kinds of problems and also the aesthetic of these problems as work in itself. And I think that is like connecting now to the way I'm using my grandmother's materials, or even the way I was working with the rubbings and like the color studies within the rubbing project.
Do you consider this work you're working on with your grandmother's Enamel Archive some kind of a mural? Would you call it a mural?
I'm not sure what the end result is going to be. So right now I have a prototype for these. I think I will be working on these enameled steel tiles that they have some dimensionality to them, and they have holes in the side. So it will be a module that could be interconnected, and that might be into small painting-sized compositions, or it could be incorporated into furniture or architecture. I have 237 colors from her studio. So my first task is to fire each of those colors onto one of those tiles. So I will have 237 tiles that I'll be working with, and I'm not yet sure the final form or the final outcome, or it could be multiple forms.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm checking whether if we have any questions, but I think we don't. So,
would you like to speak about your experience with the work at Novartis? I've never seen it in person myself.
And one thing I was actually, it's a very durable form of art. Architecture is, I guess, one of the most durable forms of art anyways, and this work is embedded within the architecture. So, in a way, I was thinking, what does it mean, like, to have it? But from another perspective, it's a restricted view. Like, I had to enter there with a permission and all that. So it's not open to the view of all. So those two aspects I thought about before I even encountered the work. When I met the work in person, what struck me about this enameling technique is that how transparent the color is, and this gives a very sensual feeling, very layered. Sort of, it is like, when you do watercolor and you can follow the brush of the artist, because how a long time you spend at each point affects the transparency of the color, So I had a similar effect. And I liked it against the architecture being so sensual, and it's a workspace, but it made it kind of, it's because I worked in an office for 3.5 years. I think it's a great addition to a workspace, to be honest, because like usually these buildings have like this cold, colors like gray, blue, black, white, whatever, like nothing to distract. And this doesn't distract, but it speaks, like it's effective. It speaks to your emotions because of this character of enamel. And I think it's something unusual for an office building to embody an art piece like that. Usually, it's more like pop art pieces or minimalist works that don't have that quality, let's say.
Yeah, she did do some of her work. She did a lot of corporate commissions. She also did a few private commissions and some public. She also did some public art pieces. But, due to the nature of the work, it was usually either like large public commissions or corporate commissions. And that is something that I did feel conflicted about when I was younger. I know she really wanted me to like follow in her footsteps and work on enamel the way that she did. And I don't know, I was going to art school and thought like, I don't want to make corporate lobby art. So that is something that I definitely have felt like conflicted about when I was younger. But I think I can definitely really like appreciate her work.
Yeah, it was a very special experience for me to experience these works in person too. We have a question.
Okay.
Okay. The question is, can you offer us some assignments to understand light and color?
Can I offer assignments?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the assignments are very clearly outlined. I would highly recommend getting like one of these like pocket copies of the interaction of color, these paperback copies, because the assignments are so clearly outlined, and to do them, you need colored paper to make the collages with. So I guess some of the assignments that I just described would be assignments that one could work on. I would recommend investing in a packet of color aid paper, which is what we used to make the assignments, which is a package of 314 individually silk screened pieces of paper that each have a unique shape. So that just provides you with like a very large palette of colors that you might not necessarily work with if you're using found paper or painting your own paper. But if you just want to like open your perception a little bit, you could do an after it. Without getting it into like collage, you could do an after image. Let me see if I have a visual for it in the book. Basically, if you like focus, it's hard to do this without having like a visual to offer, but like an example is to focus on a red dot on a black background. Stare at the red circle for 30 seconds. Actually, you know what? We can use the elevator door that you photographed if we can get that back up. If you can stare at this red circle on this elevator door for 30 seconds, and then when you're finished, look at a white wall. Should we do it together? Or?
Yeah, okay. Let's do it, I think.
Let's do it. I'm going to look at my clock. So start staring now. And just really try to focus on the center of the red circle with both your eyes. And then look at a white wall. Sena, what do you see?
I see a bluish green.
Yeah, that is the after image of the red. Your brain is correcting for all that red by projecting the opposite color. So when you look away, you are seeing the inverse of the red.
And this condition is what affects, like what makes these exercises, the other ones that you showed, the color exercises, possible, right? Your eyes adjust to, like, your eyes create a reaction towards the color in the background. Therefore, you see the other color in a slightly different tone or the same tone. Yeah, in this case.
Like, for example, in the simultaneous contrast, like when the light green is on a green background, it looks more yellow. The green background brings out the yellow in that shape. But when that same greenish yellow is on yellow, then you see the green part of it. And then, or in this assignment where there are two different colors that you're trying to make look the same, when they're on these bright colored backgrounds of a similar color, it kind of like sucks out the saturation. They just like look like these browns. But then when you look at them on the contrasting background, you see how different they are.
They are, actually. Like, I want to ask you something, actually. Let me say if I can phrase it right. Like, you know, this work with the archive actually creates this link, like it creates a relationship between the past, present, and future through like this work. So, like, when we are working with the archive, we have a vision of future and we're working with the past, and we also kind of position ourselves in the present. And like, what do you think about like carrying these works into the future in a way, your archival work, what kind of effect it can create? What would make you feel happy or satisfied that might happen? You know, is it like the new encounters with new people or new possibilities? Like, what would you say about this?
Yeah, I definitely enjoy the amount of connections I make. I mean, I've like learned so much through researching Irwin's work. I've learned so much about the history of Cooper Union, where I studied, and Irwin taught in both the architecture and art schools, and just learning like how those two schools have had like very different archiving practices. So I don't know, it's like a constant form of learning to be doing something different all the time. And of course, yeah. And while like I said, I like to stray from like a historic idea of like historical importance, but of course there is also an aspect of feeling like I was in the like Irwin taught this amazing color class for over 30 years. I was in the last class he taught. They don't teach the class the same way, and just feeling like there is some historical importance to documenting that and making that available for other people to research, and connecting with other artists and researchers. And yeah, and Irwin used stories to teach the color class. And when he was describing how like the color relationships work, like why you're perceiving one green as yellow and the other one as green, he would talk about, you know, running into a friend that you hadn't seen since college, and the friend had their child with them, and you thought, oh, this child does not look like my friend at all. But then you saw the child with the other parent, and you see, oh, the child looks so much like my friend. So yeah, and he'd use like parties that he went to in the 60s as analogies for like how unexpected color combinations could work, like relating it to people that you wouldn't expect to get along. So there's definitely like a social aspect both to the work and to archiving it.
That's a great story. Actually, like, I'm happy you introduced us. Like for me, I would never be aware of his work if you didn't do this work. And so I think it's valuable in that respect. We have one more question. Maybe this is our last question. Do you find that your practice has changed since looking deeper into your grandmother's studio and work?
Yes, definitely. It's because I am now working with her material, and now that I am like embarking on enamel as my own project, I am looking very closely at things in her studio that like I'm actually like looking at photos of her studio as clues for how she did things that I can't remember how she did them. But I'm also like learning a lot of things that she didn't ever teach me about enamel. I've taken several courses. I've met a lot of other artists working with enamel. So that is definitely expanding my practice and what I see as possible for what I'm going to do with her colors.
Okay, thank you so much, Carmelle. I think we don't have any further questions right now. So we will move on to the private session of the work group in 5-6 minutes. And thank you again for sharing.
Thanks so much for having me. This is a pleasure. Thank you.
And to all of those who are watching this broadcast, thank you for watching us. Bye.
Bye.